Hello, my name is John, and I have created this little database that I want to take your tour through. I originally created it as I started 3D printing, just to keep track of how many grams I'm using in a filament roll. That way I can know if I got enough left to do the next print. Eventually it turned into a lot more than that, so I kept adding and adding. Isn't that right? Yep. So, by the way, this is no hoo-ha, and you'll see that come up more later on because I've used him as an example. So I've also got my little, well, you can't really see it, tiki bar shelf back there. But a lot of the stuff I've built is just for around my house. And this database has served all the purposes I need it for. And I'm kind of gearing up if I'm going to start selling stuff. I've sold a few things to friends, but that's about it so far. But now I'm prepared to keep track of everything. Let's take a look. By the way, in case you're wondering, this is how I did it. I printed some bearings and a spindle on the bottom, and I got a foot catch down there. So if I move this foot catch, that way I can have both hands on the bar, and you'll never know how I moved it. Once you get an email with the database attached, just click on the database icon, pick out FileMaker Go, and it opens up. So now that we're on the home screen, let's go through the basics of what each of these tabs does. And we're going to start with the bottom flowchart. This gives you the basic flow of how you set this up. So first you want to set up your filaments library. That's where you put all your stock of filaments in there, and then you'll use that later to choose which filament you're going to print the objects from. Next, you want to set up your default settings because those will be used in every object you made. You can go through and change that after the fact, or you can just leave it as it is. It's just a way to automate it and speed up your process. Jobs is essentially a way to group objects together, and whether it's a job for a paying customer or just one project you're making or internal tests, it's a way to group these objects together. And you can then see profit and loss by job or by the overall settings. And if you want to see the profit and loss on any particular object, you go to that object. We'll get into that in more detail in a little bit here. Let's go back to home page. Okay, let's start out with the filaments library. We'll click on that. And in this case, it takes you to the list. Now, if the first time you click into it, it's going to take you to an individual page like this, so you can set up your first filament. But if I click this little icon in the right corner, that's a list icon, you can see I've got plenty of filaments in here already. And these are sorted, when you first come to this page, it's sorted first by brand, then by filament, and then by whether or not it's empty. And you can see all the empty ones float down to the bottom. So on the right side, you can see it's got a roll number. So I'm on my third roll of ASA white. And then there's a checkbox on the side to create or drop it down as empty. I don't automate that because estimates on 3D printing aren't that accurate. So when it says you're out of filament, you may or may not actually be out of filament. So let's go on this first one, ASA. If you see at the top here, I've got 3 tabs: ordering, printing notes, and objects. I ordered this, the store name, let's see, let me bring up a blank one. So you can see the default names when it's blank. The order, or the store I should say, was 3D Max. And you got a place for your website, the brand, the filament. The checkbox for empty is also shows up here. The roll number, and features. I'm not going to bother filling in all that basic information, but let's say we put in, let's say this is $12, and just make it, actually, let's make it 25. That's a little more realistic. Put in your kilograms, and you get a default list at the bottom of 1, 0.75, or 0.5. If none of those work for you, you can actually just hit it again and put in, let's say it's 0.25. And I put the price in as 1,225. So if that's for 25 kilograms and your cost per kilogram is 4,900, which means you're using some heavy duty stuff. Let's take that out. Make that 26, whatever. You can put in shipping costs, taxes. It gives you a total price, and then it gives you your cost per kilogram based on the total cost. So if we say this is 13 bucks, it adds that in there. Now also note, it's still pretty expensive. So if I actually go in there and say this is a 1 kilogram roll, which is the standard, then it's actually cost you $39 per kilogram. In here, there's a place to put the date. Now, if you just ordered this today, you actually got to change the date and bring it back. Otherwise, the iPhone will not enter it. Well, I don't know if it's iPhone or FileMaker database. So now if I go back to the list, let's see, let's put a name in here. Let's just call this test. I'll go back to the list. See, I didn't put a brand in, so that floated to the top, and it's also grayed out. Now it's grayed out because you don't have a delivery date in there yet. I would click on that and say it's going to be delivered tomorrow. Now if I go back to the list, it's now black. It doesn't really matter, it doesn't lock you out of anything, but it's just a way to keep track of trying not to use filaments you don't actually have yet. Okay, I'm going to delete this, which is the little minus sign over here. By the way, when I added it, it was a little plus sign on the other side. I'm going to go over this one. So if I say delete, which is the minus, it asks me, do you want to delete all the objects that were created with this too? I'm going to cancel. If I go over to objects, you can see these are all the objects that I created with that filament. So I don't want to delete these. That's why I put an empty roll instead of actually deleting the roll. If I go to, let's go back to printing notes, see if I put any in here. By the way, this stuff in the center section here, I copied off the website. So if I go over here, I put in some information there too. There's a place to put in a ULR for your printer's website. And then printing notes. You can just, usually I'll just copy paste. Let's see if I got another one in here. I'm using the scroll keys at the bottom to go through. Some of them I did, a lot of them I didn't. So, but you can copy these. Let's go back. I'm going to go to the list to make this easy. 3D Max. Whoops. You can't click on the brand name because that allows you to change it in groups. But I'll click on the name. And if I go to click on the ULR, it'll take me to the website. And then if I wanted to go down here, find the print recommended settings, just copy all that in. If you notice, I forgot to mention something. Down at the bottom here it says open in Safari. So right now I'm in a web viewer within FileMaker. So if I just hit done, and I'll go over to printing notes, click into here, and paste. Now if I go to, when I'm picking out filaments, I'll show this when I'm in objects, but when I'm picking out a filament to print for that object, it'll bring up this information while I'm picking up the while I'm picking out the filament. And you can always click on that filament later, when you're getting ready to print, so you can check what the settings were. It's a handy way to keep track of it if you don't already have it memorized. So down at the bottom here, if I hit order again, I'm going to say no. And what it did is duplicated all the information I had in here, except for the objects, because I haven't printed any objects with this particular roll yet. But you notice it also says duplicate, and it says 4, because I was getting mixed up. I wasn't noticing the roll change, because when you get into objects, you can do the same thing, and it writes duplicate there. So just as a reminder of which roll I'm actually on, when I create a new one, I put duplicate. Usually I erase that and just use the roll number. Okay, I'm going to delete this. Make sure I'm on the right one. If I scroll back here, I've got my ASA with all the objects I printed. And I believe, one other thing I should point out, if the prices change, this puts in all the prices, and when you do a new one, it automatically puts in the order date, because it figures you're ordering it now. But if prices have changed, you have to go back through and change these prices. But, it's just a shortcut. It adds information that it thinks you're going to be using. Let's go back to home page. Next, let's go look at jobs. Okay, let's pick out No Hoo Ha. And under this, jobs is basically just the group name or the category, if you like. If I was doing this for a client, I only would have made $5. Now, a lot of that is because I've got all these failed prints. So the ones in green are done. You got little check boxes under here. Let me blow this up. So you can check this box if it's done. Right now it's black because you haven't done anything with it. But when it's done, you can hit check that, and it'll go down to the bottom. So you got your ones that you haven't done yet float to the top. The same is true down here. You can see I got a checkbox for the failed print. Now I can also do failed and done, which drops it to the bottom of the failed list. You don't have to do that. It's easier to see these if you don't. And when we get into objects, I'll go more into detail there. But as you can see, I've got lots of failed parts, and that was mostly because I was determined to design and build my own print-in-place bearings. So, I bought this printer 8 months ago, so I've been going through a process of learning how to use it and learning how to use Fusion 360, and I've spent a lot of time on it, and I have succeeded. So that's basically your job list. Now your job list can be anything. Let's see, let's go back into here. Beast rat trap. Unfortunately, I have a very large rat. You can see down here, I built a rat trap already successfully, but it turns out this rat is 20 inches long, and that rat trap was not big enough, so I'm currently printing another one. Oh, we don't need to go there. Home button. These buttons are pretty small, but I'm trying to cram a lot of information onto small screens, and I'm trying to make it so it's usable on any iPhone. I only have the 12 Pro Max, so that's all I can really test it on. And FYI, I'm printing the lid for that beast rat trap right now. And to clarify, that rat isn't in my house. It chewed through my patio screen out back, and it gets back into my patio where I've got my barbecue and keeps trying to get food out of the barbecue. So it's going away. Now let's talk about objects. Objects are the meat of this whole thing, because these are the items that you print. So you can go in from this home screen, and it brings up every object you've done. And these underlined texts you can sort by. But that's not how I normally go into this. I'll go back to the home screen, and I'll pick out a job. Let's go back to No Hoo Ha. And I can click on one of these objects, and it takes me into the main setup page for objects. Now I usually start setting this up when I'm in the slicer, because that gives me my print time, meters, and grams. I don't know if I actually need meters for anything. Grams is what I use to determine how much I have left on a roll. And print time gives you cost estimates. So if you look over here on charges, at the top you've got 3 tabs: setup, charges, and default settings. You'll see these in default settings too. It's the same thing. I'm going to skip around a little bit here. So if you look at all these settings, if I go to home, default settings, when you first set this up, you put in your basic information of the equipment you're using. You can change the titles on the left side. So evac, that's actually a fan, so let's write fan. So basically you put in your wattages, you put in your cost per kilowatt hour, and it'll calculate how much electricity you used. You put in whatever you want as your standard labor cost and your estimated time for setup for each print. You can change all these later. Default maintenance cost, default profit margin, and printer website if you'd like. Then when you go back into here, those same settings show up here. And when you first create an object, those same settings are used here. So it puts in the defaults for cost and gives you electrical cost. Now the white cells are ones where you can add information. The rest of them are all calculations. So maintenance cost, if you want to change that, you can change it individually here. If you change stuff on this page, it does not change the defaults. It only changes it for that particular object. So say you're doing this for a friend, you don't want a profit margin, and you want to change your labor rate to $5 an hour or free, you just take that out. If you spent 2 hours setting something up and dealing with it, you just change it to 2 hours. This is your hours, this is your minutes. So let's go back to this setup. If I click on this, down at the bottom it gives me a list of all the jobs. You can scroll through, you can see this is now on no hoo-ha build. I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to hit duplicate this yet, and you can see I've got buttons here for failed and done. This did not fail, so I'm going to take that off. But it does the same thing here. See how it's green strike through? If I take off the done part, it's a red strike through. But I'm going to put it on done and uncheck the fail. So this is the bottom piece for the bearing that I made. And print time was 6 hours, 41 minutes, 95 grams. And you can see it cost me 0.5 cents per gram, or 5 cents per gram. So the cost of this whole print, based on how many grams I used, was $4.75. So the remaining estimate is $2.23. That's how many it's estimating I have left on that roll. And that's based on everything I printed, not just this one print. At the bottom, I put in stuff that, basically notes from the slicer. So if I want to recreate this, or if I had problems with the first time, I don't make the same mistake the second time. Say I run out of filament halfway through this job, or I want to change it to something else. I can hit add a filament. You see over here first where it says 100%. When you first pick one filament, it'll assume that you're going to use 100%. If that changes, I wouldn't mix these two, but let's just say I'm going to add this one. See, it comes up with your information about the filament. And if there's more stuff in there that fits on the screen, you can scroll up and down. I'll hit yes, and it's added that filament. And it's taken out the percentages because it does know what percentages you're going to use. It also took out your costs. So let's go put, say, and 60. So now it gives you the total cost of all this, and at the bottom you see the total filament cost is a combination of those two. You can add as many filaments as you want. The first time I ran out of filament halfway through a print, I figured out that this database doesn't calculate that, so I had to figure that out. At any rate, I'm going to erase this bottom one, click on it. If I hit, and you can click on it while you're setting up your printer so you can see these settings. And if you do that and you don't want to delete it, just hit return. Otherwise, delete, that goes away, and then you got to go back and change this. Now, by the way, if this print did fail, to get accurate costs, to get these charges right, to see how much it's going to show that you lost money. But to set that up correctly, you have to go back in and put how many hours was it actually printing before it failed, and then put your estimate, say, I think it only got about 10% of the way done, and it'll change your estimate. So I'm going to add that back in. And I think that takes you through everything in the object section. Let's go back to the home page. So the last thing to cover is the profit and loss. Let's click into that, and we'll do start out by job. Let's do tiki bar shelf. I made a little shelf for my liquor bottles on the back bar. So up at the top, you can see we got our electricity cost, and then that total is brought down below under charge summary. Filament usage for it's basically 3 different pieces. Maintenance costs, well, you can read all those. I don't have to read them to you. But the total charge is the combination of these in charge summary. And then the profit is the total charge minus your costs. So your costs are $24.59, and that leaves you with a profit of $31.58. Fairly simple. Now I could get, I made this for myself, so I'm not actually making a profit. If I really want to take the time to get into it, I could change that. So, you got your internal costs, and then you got your costs if you're sending this to a customer, but I'm not that sophisticated yet. But let me show you one other feature. Oh, also at the top, it shows you I spent 33.83 hours on this. Now that's the hours I spent. If you're cleaning up the parts or you're just setting up the printer or whatever, it doesn't include, in this case, it doesn't include designing, and it doesn't include the actual printer time, because the printer is running for quite a while. But let's go back to home, profit and loss, and we'll do overall. So this is everything to date. So in the last 8 months, I've put in 1,090, almost 1,098 hours. And that's usage of me working on the printer. That's not the print time or the printer's hours. That's how much time I've spent going back and forth to the printer. And, that profit isn't really that much, because most of the stuff I've done is either testing or stuff I made for me around the house. Jacuzzi drain covers, things like that. I made quite a bit of stuff for around the house, but at any rate, I think that wraps it up, gives you a fairly good overview of this. Thanks.